What happens when a secret relationship turns into a deadly obsession? When wealth, power, and desperation collide, leaving one person dead and another facing life behind bars. The question lingers, as the scene unfolds. Flashing lights from police vehicles cast harsh shadows across the pristine driveway of a grand estate. Uniformed officers move with purpose, their faces marked by the weight of what they've just uncovered. Paramedics emerge from the front door, a covered stretcher between them. Silent witnesses to a tragedy too shocking to comprehend. This wasn't just a crime. It was the unraveling of a story filled with manipulation, betrayal, and hidden truths. Within the walls of this opulent home, two lives from opposite worlds came together, one, a woman of immense power and privilege, the other, a young man struggling to rise above crushing poverty. Their connection was intoxicating, their dynamic complex. But behind the facade of their relationship, something was unraveling. How did this meeting, this connection, lead to the events of tonight? What signs were ignored, what warnings went unheeded? And most importantly, who held the final card when their story reached its breaking point? This is more than just a story of a crime, it's an investigation into power, control, and the devastating consequences of obsession. As we piece together the events leading to this tragic night, one question will remain: was this preventable, or was it always destined to end in heartbreak? Welcome to True Crime Archives. Thank you to all our viewers, especially our amazing subscribers, for your continued support. Your encouragement drives us to keep improving and delivering the most compelling daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Stay tuned, there's so much more to uncover. To understand how a relationship of such disparity led to tragedy, we must first explore the lives of the individuals involved, their pasts, their choices, and the invisible forces that pulled them into each other's orbit. This is where the story truly begins. Camilla Harrington had everything, or so it seemed. At 57, she stood as a symbol of success, a self-made powerhouse in the luxury event planning industry. Her name was synonymous with opulence, her events were spectacles attended by the elite. But beneath the veneer of success lay a woman embittered by life's failures. Born into wealth, Camilla grew up in an affluent African-American family in Atlanta. Her childhood was one of privilege but lacked genuine affection. Her father, a prominent businessman, was cold and controlling, instilling in her an early understanding that power and influence could replace love. Her mother, a glamorous socialite, often turned a blind eye to the cracks in their family's foundation. Camilla's adult life mirrored her upbringing. Charmed on the outside, but turbulent within. Multiple marriages followed, each more disastrous than the last. Her relationships often ended in acrimony, leaving her with a hardened heart and a sharp mistrust of others. Yet, despite her wealth, Camilla craved something intangible: control. Control over her relationships, her image, and most importantly, over the people in her life. Her loneliness pushed her into transactional relationships, often targeting young men from disadvantaged backgrounds. For Camilla, these relationships weren't about love, they were about dominance. She wielded her wealth as a weapon, using gifts and financial stability to bend others to her will. And when they resisted, her manipulative nature emerged, ensuring that no one escaped her grasp unscathed. Camilla's life of control, however, was about to collide with someone whose desperation made him the perfect mark, and the perfect storm. Josiah Langston's world was as far removed from Camilla's as one could imagine. At just 19, he carried burdens that should have never fallen on such young shoulders. Raised in a small, struggling urban neighborhood, Josiah's life was a constant battle against the odds. The eldest of 3 siblings, Josiah had to step into a fatherly role early on. His father's incarceration left his family fractured, forcing his mother, Gloria Langston, to work tirelessly to keep them afloat. Gloria, a resilient single mother, juggled 2 jobs as a cleaner and a seamstress, often leaving Josiah to care for his younger siblings. The weight of responsibility was suffocating, yet Josiah never complained. He was determined to provide, even if it meant putting his dreams on hold. Dropping out of high school wasn't a choice for Josiah, it was a necessity. He picked up odd jobs wherever he could, working long hours for little pay. Despite his circumstances, he carried an unshakable hope for a better future. Josiah dreamed of something more, an escape from poverty, a chance to break the cycle that had trapped his family for generations. When Camilla Harrington walked into his life, she represented everything Josiah thought he needed. Wealth, opportunity, and a way out. To Josiah, she wasn't just a woman, she was a lifeline. But what he saw as salvation was something far more dangerous. Josiah's charm and naivety made him an easy target. He didn't see the warning signs, the red flags that others around him noticed almost immediately. For a young man desperate to change his life, Camilla's attention felt like a blessing. But in reality, it was a trap. Josiah's mother, Gloria, was the glue holding her family together. Her strength came from necessity, not choice. She had endured more than most, raising 3 children alone in the face of crushing adversity. Her days were long, her nights longer, but her love for her children was unwavering. When Josiah began speaking of Camilla, Gloria's intuition kicked in. She saw through the polished facade of the older woman who had taken an interest in her son. Gloria's skepticism wasn't just maternal instinct, it was a hard-earned wisdom forged through years of hardship. She warned Josiah repeatedly, but her words fell on deaf ears. To Josiah, Gloria's concerns felt like obstacles to his escape, not the warnings they truly were. Camilla's only child, Felicity Harrington, had long distanced herself from her mother's manipulative tendencies. Growing up under Camilla's shadow, Felicity saw firsthand how her mother's need for control poisoned every relationship. By the time she was 18, Felicity had left home, choosing independence over her mother's influence. Though estranged, Felicity remained observant. She watched from a distance as her mother cycled through younger lovers, each relationship more concerning than the last. When she met Josiah, Felicity's suspicions about her mother's intentions deepened. She tried to warn him, just as Gloria did, but her words were met with polite dismissal. To Josiah, Felicity's warnings seemed like echoes of Gloria's doubts, an obstacle to the life he thought Camilla could provide. Detective Royce Calhoun was the man tasked with piecing together the truth when the case exploded into public view. Known for his calm demeanor and methodical approach, Royce was more than just a detective, he was a storyteller, uncovering the narratives hidden in every piece of evidence. Royce had seen it all before, relationships built on imbalance, driven by hidden agendas, and ending in disaster. But even he was unprepared for the layers of manipulation and deceit that Camilla and Josiah's story would reveal. As Royce sifted through evidence, interviewed witnesses, and traced the events leading to the fatal night, he found himself drawn into a labyrinth of desperation and control that spanned far beyond the crime itself. 2 lives, one hardened by privilege, the other shaped by struggle, collided in a way that seemed inevitable yet entirely avoidable. Their story wasn't just about love or betrayal. It was about power, survival, and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession. It began in the most unassuming of places, a modest diner tucked into the heart of the city. The kind of place where regulars gathered, trading stories over greasy plates of food, where dreams of something better seemed as distant as the horizon. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Camilla Harrington first saw Josiah Langston. He was clearing tables with quiet determination, his worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. His movements were efficient but unhurried, a reflection of someone accustomed to hard work with little reward. Camilla watched him from her booth, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, the way he smiled politely at customers, the way his shoulders slumped ever so slightly under the weight of his invisible burdens. Camilla wasn't there for the food. She rarely frequented places like this, but a meeting nearby had run late, and she found herself craving coffee. Yet, as she observed Josiah, her mind began crafting a new narrative. She saw potential in him, not as an equal, but as someone she could mold, someone who might fill the void left by years of isolation and failed relationships. When their paths finally crossed, it wasn't an accident. Camilla made sure to linger as he passed by her booth. Her voice was warm but commanding as she complimented his work ethic and asked his name. Josiah, caught off guard, muttered a shy, "Thank you, ma'am," before continuing with his tasks. But Camilla wasn't one to be ignored. She called him over again, this time offering more than just praise. "You look like a young man who knows the value of hard work," she said, her tone rich with possibility. "How would you like to earn a little extra money on the side? I could use someone like you." Josiah hesitated. He wasn't used to strangers offering opportunities, especially ones who dressed like they belonged in a world he'd only seen on TV. Her designer coat and polished demeanor were worlds apart from his reality. He felt a mix of curiosity and unease as she explained her proposition, a side job helping her set up events, something she assured him was easy work with good pay. At first, Josiah declined. He didn't know her, and the offer sounded too good to be true. But later that night, as he walked home through the rain, his mother's weary face filled his mind. Bills piled high on their small kitchen table. His siblings' hand-me-down clothes that no longer fit. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break they needed. The next day, Josiah returned to the diner with a decision. He approached Camilla, who was waiting for him as if she'd anticipated his change of heart. His voice was steady but cautious. "I'll do it," he said. Camilla smiled, a triumphant curve of her lips that Josiah didn't yet understand. What started as a professional arrangement quickly became something else. Camilla's promises of good pay were true, but they were only the beginning. Within weeks, she began buying Josiah small gifts, nothing extravagant at first, a new pair of sneakers, a warm jacket for the winter. She framed these gestures as kindness, but each gift came with strings Josiah couldn't yet see. Her generosity escalated. When Josiah mentioned his family's struggles, Camilla quietly slipped him an envelope filled with cash, brushing off his attempts to thank her. "You deserve it," she said, her words laced with a possessiveness he mistook for genuine care. The line between employer and benefactor blurred. Camilla began asking Josiah to stay longer after events, sharing glasses of wine while recounting stories from her glamorous life. At first, he listened out of politeness, but over time, he began to feel a pull, a strange mix of gratitude and obligation. Camilla knew how to work her way into his life. She began offering advice on everything from his clothes to his future. "You're too smart to stay stuck where you are," she would say, her voice filled with both encouragement and quiet control. "With my help, you can have the life you've always dreamed of." It wasn't long before their conversations turned personal, and then, romantic. Josiah, overwhelmed by the weight of his struggles and the allure of her promises, didn't resist. He didn't see the subtle shifts in their dynamic, the way her questions became demands, her gifts became expectations. To Josiah, Camilla was a savior, a gateway to a better life for himself and his family. But to Camilla, Josiah was something entirely different, a project, a possession, a fleeting answer to her own loneliness. The balance of power had shifted before Josiah even realized it. And what began as an opportunity would soon become a trap he couldn't escape. What began as generosity quickly turned into something far more binding. Camilla Harrington had perfected the art of influence, and for Josiah Langston, her kindness came with an invisible price, a cost he wouldn't fully understand until it was too late. At first, Camilla's suggestions seemed harmless. She would casually recommend where Josiah should go or how he should spend his time, often framing her advice as concern for his well-being. "You shouldn't waste your weekends in that neighborhood," she'd say, her voice smooth but firm. "Why not come with me to my events? You'll meet better people, people who can help you." Josiah, eager to please and grateful for her help, didn't see it for what it was, the beginning of Camilla's control over his life. Slowly, her influence expanded. She began texting him at all hours, expecting immediate responses. She insisted he let her know where he was at all times. When he mentioned plans with friends, Camilla would find ways to keep him busy, offering to take him shopping or introducing him to her circle. It wasn't long before Josiah's friends started noticing his absence. Calls and texts from them went unanswered, not because Josiah didn't care, but because Camilla's disapproving glances whenever he mentioned them made him feel guilty. "Those people don't understand where you're going," she'd say with a tone that was more directive than advisory. "They'll only hold you back." What Josiah thought was concern was, in reality, isolation. Camilla was methodically cutting him off from the life he once knew, ensuring that she was his only source of support. For Josiah, the realization didn't come all at once. At first, he brushed off his unease, chalking it up to the growing pains of a better life. Camilla had done so much for him, how could he complain? She'd paid for his siblings' new school supplies, helped his mother with overdue bills, and even bought him a car to make getting to her events easier. These weren't small gestures, they were lifelines. But with each new gift, Josiah felt the weight of unspoken obligations. Camilla's generosity wasn't unconditional, it came with expectations he couldn't always meet. When he hesitated to answer her calls or pushed back against her plans, her demeanor would shift. Her warm, affectionate tone would harden, replaced by clipped words and icy stares. Josiah started to feel the walls closing in. His life no longer felt like his own, and the gratitude he once felt toward Camilla began to sour. He thought about leaving, about finding a way to reclaim his freedom. But each time, he stopped himself. How could he walk away when his family relied on her? How could he betray the woman who had given him so much? The conflict tore at him, loyalty to the woman who had helped him and the growing need to escape her grasp. Camilla, ever perceptive, sensed Josiah's unease. She didn't confront him directly, that wasn't her style. Instead, she relied on more insidious tactics. She would remind him, often in passing, of all the ways she had supported him. "Do you think anyone else would have helped you the way I have?" she'd ask, her voice soft but tinged with an edge. "After everything I've done for you, I just hope you don't take me for granted." Her words were calculated, designed to instill guilt and reinforce his dependence. When Josiah mentioned wanting to spend more time with his family, Camilla would feign hurt. "I thought you'd want to spend time with me. But if you'd rather be somewhere else," she'd trail off, her disappointment hanging in the air. These subtle threats escalated over time. When Josiah tried to assert himself, suggesting he take a break from their constant plans, Camilla's responses became sharper. "Maybe I've been too generous," she'd say, her tone colder now. "Maybe I should stop trying so hard if it's not appreciated." Josiah didn't know how to respond. Each attempt to pull away seemed to tighten her grip, and with every passing day, he felt the life he once knew slipping further out of reach. Camilla's control over Josiah wasn't overt, it was subtle, creeping into every aspect of his life until it left no room for anything else. For Josiah, the realization of what he'd lost came too late. He was trapped, bound by gratitude and fear, unable to see the path forward or the danger that lay ahead. Every tightly woven thread begins to unravel eventually, and for Camilla Harrington, the first sign of trouble came not through confrontation, but through instinct, a growing sense that the young man she'd molded and controlled was no longer fully hers. In the quiet corners of his old neighborhood, Josiah Langston found solace with someone unexpected, Shanice Preston. A young woman from his past, Shanice had known Josiah long before his life became entangled with Camilla. She was warm, understanding, and unafraid to speak the truth. Shanice saw what Josiah couldn't, or refused to, see. She noticed the strain in his voice when he spoke about Camilla, the exhaustion that came from balancing her demands and his own life. "She's not helping you," Shanice told him one evening as they sat on the stoop of her family's home. "She's controlling you. That's not love, Josiah." Their meeting started innocently enough, conversations in passing, stolen moments where Josiah could breathe without the weight of Camilla's expectations. But as time went on, their connection deepened. Shanice encouraged him to think about a future beyond Camilla, a future where he could reclaim his independence. For the first time in months, Josiah began to consider what leaving might look like. But these moments of clarity came with a risk. Josiah knew the consequences of Camilla finding out. Yet, as Shanice's presence grew in his life, the grip Camilla held over him began to loosen. Or so he thought. Camilla Harrington was no fool. She'd built her success on reading people, understanding their motives and weaknesses. And in Josiah, she sensed a shift. His excuses for being late, the way he avoided her gaze during their conversations, it all pointed to something he wasn't telling her. Camilla's initial approach was subtle. She began questioning him more frequently, masking her probing with concern. "You've been so distracted lately. Is everything all right?" she would ask, her tone sweet but her eyes sharp. Josiah's vague responses only fueled her suspicions. Unwilling to confront him directly, Camilla took matters into her own hands. She contacted a private investigator, a professional known for discretion and results. Her instructions were clear: follow Josiah, document his every move, and report back with the truth. It didn't take long for the investigator to uncover what Camilla feared most. Photos of Josiah and Shanice meeting in secret, sitting close on a park bench, talking animatedly outside her home. The evidence was undeniable. When the investigator handed her the report, complete with dates, times, and photographs, Camilla's suspicion solidified into certainty. Camilla stared at the photos in silence, her expression unreadable. The investigator, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself, leaving her alone with the proof. For Josiah, these stolen moments of freedom felt like a lifeline. But he underestimated Camilla's resolve and her willingness to act when she felt control slipping from her grasp. What she would do next would change everything, and leave a path of destruction no one could have foreseen. The screen fades to black, the sound of a phone ringing echoing in the distance as the story inches closer to its breaking point. What should have been an ordinary health checkup for Camilla Harrington became the catalyst for an irreversible confrontation. A diagnosis delivered in a sterile doctor's office would ignite a storm of blame, denial, and devastating revelations. It was a routine appointment, a precautionary measure Camilla had scheduled between her high-profile events. The doctor's office was bright and sterile, filled with the quiet hum of distant conversations and the occasional shuffle of paperwork. Camilla, confident and composed, barely gave the visit a second thought. But when her physician entered the room, holding a clipboard with a solemn expression, the atmosphere shifted. The words came swiftly, bluntly: "Your test results indicate that you are HIV positive." Camilla's world froze. The gravity of the diagnosis didn't sink in immediately. The doctor continued speaking, explaining the implications, the treatment options, the need for further testing, but Camilla could barely process any of it. Her thoughts raced to one conclusion: Josiah. Back home, sitting alone in her sprawling estate, Camilla's thoughts solidified into blame. She was convinced Josiah had betrayed her on a level far deeper than infidelity. In her mind, his relationship with Shanice wasn't just an emotional betrayal, it was the source of her condition. The confrontation came later that evening. Josiah arrived at Camilla's house, weary from another long day. He barely had time to remove his coat before Camilla's voice cut through the room, sharp and accusatory: "We need to talk." Her words came out like bullets. She told him about her diagnosis, her anger escalating with each sentence. "This is your fault, Josiah. You've been reckless, careless. And now look at what you've done." Josiah stood frozen, his mind scrambling to make sense of her accusations. "What are you talking about?" he finally managed, his voice tinged with confusion and disbelief. Camilla thrust the doctor's report toward him, her hands trembling. "I tested positive, Josiah. And don't even try to deny it, I know where this came from." It's Shanice, isn't it? The accusation hit Josiah like a blow. He vehemently denied it, insisting he had no symptoms and no reason to believe he was infected. But Camilla's relentless anger left him no choice. To prove his innocence, he agreed to get tested. The days that followed were tense and silent. Josiah avoided Camilla's calls, consumed by a mix of anxiety and indignation. When the test results finally came in, he sat in the clinic's waiting room, his heart pounding in his chest. The doctor's words were clear, "You're HIV negative." Relief washed over Josiah, but it was quickly replaced by anger. The accusation that had weighed on him, the assumption of guilt, it had all been baseless. When he told Camilla the results, her reaction was anything but apologetic. Instead, Camilla deflected, refusing to accept the implications. If Josiah wasn't the source, then who was? The answer lingered, unspoken, as Camilla's carefully constructed reality began to crumble. For Josiah, the truth was vindication, but for Camilla, it opened a door she wasn't prepared to walk through. Her anger shifted, no longer outward but inward, as fragments of her past came rushing back. The source of her diagnosis was not in Josiah's actions, but in secrets she had buried long before he ever entered her life. What happens when blame has nowhere to land, and anger becomes its own weapon? Humiliation can fester, transforming grief into something darker. For Camilla Harrington, the revelation of Josiah's innocence didn't bring closure, it ignited an obsession. In her mind, he was no longer the young man she had lifted from poverty. He was the cause of her unraveling, and she was determined to reclaim control in the most devastating way imaginable. The diagnosis was just the tipping point. Camilla's carefully constructed world was already crumbling, and Josiah became the easiest target for her rage. Her accusations may have been disproven, but her anger didn't subside. Instead, it grew sharper, fed by humiliation and the loss of her power over him. She replayed every moment of their relationship in her mind, twisting even the smallest instances into evidence of betrayal. Her obsession consumed her, making every interaction with Josiah a reminder of what she perceived as his disloyalty. Camilla wasn't just angry, she was seething with the need for retribution. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. For Camilla, the act of plotting Josiah's murder felt almost clinical, a necessary step to reclaim the control she felt she had lost. She started small, researching methods online late at night, her laptop screen casting an eerie glow in the darkened room. The preparations were methodical. Camilla purchased the tools she thought she'd need from various stores across the city, careful to use cash to avoid suspicion. She rehearsed her alibi, testing different scenarios to ensure that, when the time came, she would appear blameless. Every detail was considered, every possibility accounted for. In her mind, this wasn't just revenge, it was justice. She convinced herself that Josiah's betrayal had robbed her of her dignity, and this was the only way to take it back. Josiah, oblivious to the extent of Camilla's rage, continued to lean on her for support. Despite the growing tension between them, he couldn't fully sever their ties. Camilla's financial assistance still provided stability for his family, and walking away entirely felt impossible. When Camilla called him one evening, her voice unusually soft, Josiah hesitated but eventually agreed to meet. "Let's put everything behind us," she said, her words laced with false sincerity. "I want to make things right." Josiah saw Camilla's invitation as an opportunity to mend the fractures in their relationship. But what he didn't realize was that this was no reconciliation. For Camilla, this meeting was the final act in her carefully constructed plan. The evening was quiet, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Camilla's home was immaculate as always, the table set with Josiah's favorite dishes. The aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled the air, masking the darkness brewing beneath the surface. Camilla greeted Josiah with a warm smile, her demeanor calm and inviting. She poured him a glass of wine, urging him to relax as they sat down to eat. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal, like the early days of their relationship before everything went wrong. But beneath her composed exterior, Camilla's mind was racing. Her plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. As they finished the meal, Camilla's tone shifted. What began as light conversation turned sharp, her questions cutting deeper. "Why did you do it, Josiah?" she asked, her voice deceptively steady. "Why did you betray me after everything I've done for you?" Josiah, caught off guard, tried to deflect. "We've been over this, Camilla." "I never betrayed you," he said, his frustration evident. But Camilla wasn't listening. Her voice grew louder, her accusations more pointed. The argument escalated quickly, her anger boiling over as Josiah stood his ground. "I'm done feeling guilty for things I didn't do," he shouted, pushing back against her relentless blame. That was the breaking point. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Camilla grabbed the knife she had deliberately placed within reach. The room erupted in chaos as she lunged at Josiah, her actions fueled by months of pent-up anger and humiliation. The confrontation ended in seconds, leaving Josiah lifeless on the polished hardwood floor. Camilla stood over his body, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. Reality began to sink in, but instead of remorse, Camilla's mind turned to logistics. She needed to clean up, to erase the evidence of what she had done. She worked quickly, scrubbing the floor, disposing of the wine glasses, and gathering Josiah's belongings. But no matter how meticulous she was, she couldn't undo everything. Small traces of the crime remained, traces that would later seal her fate. In her quest for control, Camilla Harrington crossed a line from which there was no return. But the evidence she left behind would speak louder than her carefully rehearsed lies. And as the night gave way to morning, the weight of her actions would begin to close in. The morning after Josiah Langston failed to return home, his family began to worry. Calls to his phone went unanswered, and as the hours turned into days, concern gave way to fear. What began as a missing persons case would soon unravel into a harrowing discovery. Josiah's mother, Gloria Langston, was the first to report his disappearance. She told investigators about his connection to Camilla Harrington, the wealthy older woman who had played a significant role in his life. Despite her initial hesitance to involve the police, Gloria's maternal instincts told her something was deeply wrong. When detectives arrived at Camilla's mansion, the scene that greeted them was one of chilling contrast. The home's pristine exterior stood in stark opposition to what they found inside. At first glance, Camilla appeared calm, even composed, as she greeted the officers. But it didn't take long for the facade to crack. In the kitchen, investigators noticed faint smears on the hardwood floor, barely concealed under a fresh coat of polish. A closer examination revealed bloodstains in hard-to-reach crevices. In a nearby trash bin, Josiah's phone was found, its screen shattered, along with a piece of fabric that matched the clothes he was last seen wearing. The evidence was undeniable. What began as a wellness check quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. The mansion, once a place of luxury, was now a crime scene. As detectives delved deeper into Camilla's life, the pieces of her plan began to emerge. Her laptop, seized during the search, revealed a disturbing internet history, searches for ways to clean up blood, disposing of evidence, and self-defense murder cases. Receipts found in her office drawer showed purchases of cleaning supplies and tools that matched items used during the crime. Surveillance footage from a local hardware store captured Camilla making the purchases, her face unmistakably caught on camera. Further digging uncovered more damning evidence, a series of private messages between Camilla and a confidant, where she hinted at her growing frustration with Josiah and her desire to end the problem for good. Camilla's carefully constructed alibi crumbled under scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming, painting a picture of a calculated and premeditated act of violence. The arrest came swiftly. Detectives returned to the mansion with a warrant, finding Camilla sitting in her study, sipping wine as if nothing had happened. When the officers placed her in handcuffs, her expression barely changed. She maintained her innocence, insisting that Josiah had left her home unharmed. But the weight of the evidence left no room for doubt. Camilla Harrington was charged with first-degree murder, her name now synonymous with betrayal and control. As she was led away, the world watched, captivated by the shocking fall of a woman who had once seemed untouchable. Camilla's arrest marked the beginning of a trial that would captivate the Friends. But the evidence was only part of the story. What came next would reveal the full extent of her manipulation, her secrets, and the dark truths that had led to this tragic end. The trial of Camilla Harrington began. The courtroom overflowed with legal experts eager to witness the downfall of a woman whose life had been defined by power and control. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of Camilla, describing her as a master manipulator who had used her wealth and influence to exploit a young man before ultimately ending his life. They detailed her obsessive behavior, her calculated planning, and her attempts to cover up the crime. Midway through the trial, the defense attempted to shift the narrative, portraying Camilla Harrington as a woman driven by emotional distress and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. They argued that her actions, while extreme, were the result of an unraveling psyche and not cold-blooded intent. For a moment, the argument seemed to create doubt, until the prosecution delivered a revelation that left the courtroom stunned. Medical records, along with corroborating witness testimony, revealed that Camilla had been engaged in a double affair. Alongside her relationship with Josiah Langston, she had maintained a clandestine connection with an older lover, a wealthy businessman known only as Martin Steele. The two had shared a discreet relationship built on mutual convenience and secrecy. It was Martin who had unknowingly transmitted HIV to Camilla weeks prior. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence as the evidence was presented. The truth of her double life unraveled before a rapt audience, a stark reminder of the lengths Camilla was willing to go to preserve her carefully constructed facade. The revelation became a turning point in the trial, sealing her fate in the eyes of the jury and the public alike. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Camilla Harrington was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Camilla remained stoic, her once commanding presence now diminished. For Josiah's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but the loss remained immeasurable. The young man who had sought a better life was gone, a victim of a relationship that had promised salvation but delivered destruction. Camilla Harrington's story is one of power, obsession, and the devastating consequences of unchecked control. In her quest to dominate, she lost everything, leaving behind a legacy not of luxury, but of heartbreak and tragedy. For those left behind, the scars run deep, reminder that some wounds never fully heal. For those who find themselves in vulnerable situations, Josiah's story serves as a cautionary tale. Always prioritize self-worth over external promises, and never ignore the warning signs of coercion disguised as care. Ultimately, this case emphasizes that love rooted in control is not love at all, it is a foundation for destruction. The story ends with a haunting question: could Josiah's fate have been avoided, or was he always destined to become a victim of Camilla's obsession? Thank you for joining us in uncovering this harrowing story. If you found this case compelling, there's much more to explore. Subscribe to our channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the next gripping story.